Hey kids, it is a wascally episode of the Cosmic Geppetto podcast. Good friend Tierney Steele joins me to talk about grown-up movies turned into kids' cartoons. I also grouse about how characters act around Curious George. Anywho, I'm recording this on July 27th, 2020. It is the 80th anniversary, to the day, of the animated short A Wild Hare, considered to be the first official appearance of Bugs Bunny. As a child, Bugs was my favorite. He was smart, clever, mischievous, while still being good-hearted. I kinda wanted to be him. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. There weren't many other kids around, and my mom solved the issue, as she usually did and still does, with sewing. She created a Bugs Bunny stuffed animal for me. He became my best friend. If searching for a young Brad, you just needed to look out the window to see me in the yard wrestling with bugs. I still have that stuffy. It is possible I may occasionally pull it out to keep me company while reading. Tierney, has it ever just been you and me on a podcast?
Ooh, I don't think it has.
Oh, so this could be really awkward.
You never know.
Without other people to carry the conversation, we just might find out that we don't like each other. So let's hope for the best.
And neither of us is talkative, so that could be a problem.
Often we and I think the podcast has been getting away from this just a little bit, where we're often very panel centric, having 3-4 people together at the same time. I think with the quarantine situation, I've been getting a lot more one-on-one interviews, which is fantastic. And they're fantastic both ways. With panels, it's great because you find surprising chemistry with people. Like, well, you and Jarf. Am I right? You guys met on a panel.
Yes. I don't remember which one, though, now. I know we met via Cosmic Geppetto, but I don't remember which show it was.
We've done so many episodes. We've done so many episodes about so much crap. It's amazing. We have done 2 different episodes about the XFL. There's not that much to talk about that organization.
Brad, I am on my 5th podcast that I am producing right now. It is insane. And I'm already pre-productioning 6 and 7. I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, remember we were people?
No, that's the weird thing.
What got you started? I don't know if I've ever asked this. How did you dip your toe and get into this world?
Infamously, I used to make fun of podcasts. My husband was a big podcast listener. I got into it via Sydney and Justin McElroy. He is one of the infamous My Brother, and Me brothers. Wow, that's really hard to say. Mabib Bam brothers. He and his wife, way back in the day, did a TV rewatch podcast. And now they do a medical history one together. And I really liked listening to them tease each other via podcast. So that was my getting into the podcasting world. And so I had finally stopped making fun of the concept of podcasts. And my friend Mike talked about Star Wars Minute. And so I made fun of that concept because after all, yeah, I listen to podcasts now, but 1 minute at a time, that's crazy talk.
Stop making fun of stuff.
It always backfires completely and totally because he had the inside track and let me know that Jurassic Park Minute was going to start up. I'm like, okay, that's one movie. It's not it is a franchise, but I just really like the one movie. I'll give that a try. I can listen to my headphones at work. I've got some time to kill. And it kind of spiraled, I would say, out of control from there.
When I was just out of college, I was working a job that was 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 10 o'clock at night, which is a tough job to have when you're first sort of in the quote-unquote real world, because everybody that you know is working normal shifts, family, friends, whatever. You end up socializing a lot and more often than not, sadly, dating people that you work with because they're only people in the same schedule. A lot of 11 o'clock happy hours and stuff like that. But then what I would do on the nights where I was trying to give my liver a break, I would go home and MTV had the show Loveline with Drew Pinsky and Adam Carolla. It was on MTV. It was an entertaining show. It was a sex and love advice show. Pinsky and Carolla had good chemistry together. Now, there's a lot of reasons not to like these two guys because Pinsky is asked for commentary on stuff that he shouldn't be giving commentary on. And Carolla was always a professional douche.
But I wonder if Carolla, or if one of them were the people, it wasn't Loveline, but one of the shows they did later, I just remember one of them gesturing towards the coffee table between them and saying, I mean, I'd vote for this coffee table if it ran against Bush. Man, over the last 20 years has that quote resonated with me. So even though they are jerks, I can never quite bring myself to hate them.
I ended up being a little bit of a Carolla fan because he had a very everyman with a little bit of humor way of dealing with people who would call in, who you could see a lot of times would be kids way into their own heads about their relationship issues. And he would just say, no, you got to just end the relationship. Stop being an idiot. And he could sometimes be clever. He was a very successful DJ in LA. He lost his job and he started a podcast. And I had listened to a podcast every now and then. And the problem is, especially 10 years ago, podcasts were terrible.
They're always like 3 hours long and it's awful.
It was the Wild West because they would be very long, very rambling with people who sometimes had interesting viewpoints. But because it was a long form, because there was no editing, the sound equipment was terrible. They were basically auditory eyesores. And Carolla, because he had the radio background, knew how to go by segments and make it entertaining, engaging, and keep you from losing your interest. So I started getting into that. And then I had a book out 10 years ago, Sex, Money, Good Grades, and Other Things You Won't Get in College. It turns out there was a local podcast in my area, and I reached out to the guys like, hey, if you're looking for local people, I'm a local author. He had me on the show, but because I had radio background in college, he said, we're always looking for people to help host. And I was like, well, I can do that. And that was sort of how I got involved in it. And I did it for a couple of years. I didn't love the experience because I didn't have a lot of say on who I talked with. It was like, hey, here's a guy who ran a local train museum, which was a decent interview, but it wasn't my passion. So I did that for 2 years, and then I stopped for various reasons. But then I said, it's like, I want to do it again, but I want to talk about the stuff that I want to talk about. And that's the thing. You want to find the stuff that you're interested in and passionate about and you can talk with. And that's what Cosmic Geppetto became. And it was also finding people that I wanted to do the show with. People like you. And you and I never met before we met each other through podcast world. You're always so much fun to talk with and always have a good conversation. Or people like Jarf, who I've known for more than half my life. I do find it interesting, people who get into the podcast world. And you have some people who were in radio, were in journalism, and this is a new venue. And then you have people who liked and ended up finding their way into it.
It's just fun. And I'm so glad I got into it because I think I'd be completely losing my mind right now if I hadn't, because it's like, all right, 2 or 3 evenings a week, I talk into a microphone at my computer to people who I may or may not have ever met in person about random pop culture stuff. And guess what facet of my life hasn't changed? That one. Everything else has. That remains steady. So it's kind of a nice touchstone. It's like, oh yeah, no, I think it's totally normal to have friends across the country who I've never met, but I know like everything about how they like their omelets.
Eric Deutsch, who I worked with on Escape from New York Minute and Flash Gordon Minute, is legit one of my best friends. And he and I have never met. We did 2 shows together. He's also been on Cosmic Geppetto several times. We have a great relationship. We're good friends. We have never been in this room together.
Do you find yourself, I always feel like the worst person, but I have to keep stopping myself from listening to these podcasts and like, we can't be in the studio with people. This is so weird, guys. Sorry if the quality's bad, but I have to podcast from my home. And I'm just like, dude, I've always podcasted from my home. Figure it out. It's not that hard.
The ones I've done on location have had the worst sound quality.
And I get that, it's a change in dynamic, but it's so weird to me that these people this how they make their money. They get paid to make podcasts and they cannot figure it out to not do it in person. And I'm just like, guys, that's kind of the appeal of this medium. And you really need to adjust.
And we haven't talked a little bit. We've been trying to do this for a while. you got bit by COVID-19, or you think you did.
I think I did. And the nurse I talked to thinks I did. And it was really early. It was mid-March. Because yes, we were planning this and we had a whole time picked out. We're going to figure it out. And actually what it is I had a unrelated to anything going on death in the family. So I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do it when I said I could. We're now trying to coordinate a funeral and there's this weird, like some people are getting sick. So we're not really sure what's going on and who can come. Within 2 weeks after that, right around the time you were like, okay, how you doing? Everything good? Let's figure this out. I got sick and I don't know, but remember when this all first started and they said if you were young and healthy, you would get a mild case of it and like you'd have a cough and it would suck for a couple days and then it'd be fine. That's what I had. I don't know. I never saw a doctor. I talked to a nurse on the phone and she said, quite frankly, even if you come in, I'm just going to tell you this to your face. So let me tell you it over the phone and we can all move on with our lives.
Undiagnosed but symptomatic, was that symptomatic is what they called it?
Yeah, I had the cough, the chest tightness, the whole nine. I didn't have a fever, but she basically was like, what's your favorite cough medicine? Do you have some in the house? I was like, yeah. She goes, take that. Sleep. I don't know. It's entirely possible. I'll never know. But yeah, when you called me right as that had started, I was like, I can't do a podcast right now. It was about a week that I had symptoms, and then it just kind of tailed off, and finally there was a day. And honestly, towards the end there, you know what? I'll throw this out there, and your female listeners, or maybe some of your more adventurous male listeners, will understand what I'm talking about. My husband did not. It felt like I was wearing a too tight bra and shirt. But like all the time, and I couldn't do anything to, like if that happens, if you're out partying and you're wearing a too tight dress, you come home and you take off the dress and you're like, that's the best feeling in the world.
You did not have that relief. You did not have that feeling.
I did not there was no way to get that feeling, but that's honestly the like best analogy I could come up with. And then all the men in my life were just looking at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, why am I surrounded by boys in this situation?
When the last eagle flies over the last crumbling mountain, and the last lion roars at the last dusty fountain in the shadow.
I lived with a woman for a year, a friend of mine, and she would we worked together, and then we shared a house together. And I remember she would come home, and she's like, and of course, after you live with someone of the opposite gender for a while, all of a sudden things go all out the window. And she would just come home. The first thing she would just reach behind her back, unhook her bra, and sproing, and she's like, "There we go." I remember the satisfaction she got from that.
That was my experience. Now, I obviously was incredibly lucky because I don't even know if that's what happened. It sounds like it. The cough sounded like my aunt's a nurse, and she was like, well, you're describing what they're telling us to look for. I know people who have it now who are young and healthy and all that, and they're just getting walloped. So I don't know what the circumstances are, but yeah, I'm pretty... It worked out. Knock on wood. I'm good now. I'm done with all my drama. But then I also became, kind of by default, a stay-at-home mom of a 2-year-old. All my free time went bye-bye really fast. And like I said, I'm a podcast maker and producer too. And so it became this horrendous juggling act of like, you know who's hard to explain Audacity editing to? A 2-year-old. He understands that, like, I have to work. And he says, like, mommy working on podcasts? I go, yes, mommy working on podcasts. Please don't touch any buttons. But yeah, so it got a little hectic. So I'm so glad to be talking to you. It has been so long. It
has been. It's so good to have you back. Explain your idea, because I love it, but I don't think I'll do it justice.
My idea that just came to me came because all of a sudden I was a stay-at-home mom and I was spending all this time with a 2-year-old. And I picked up a couple books that I was like, finally like, okay, you can handle something other than a board book. Let's look at these. And I had been gifted and gotten for myself a couple, they're called pop classic books. They're illustrated by Kim Smith. They're based on characters by whatever it is. And I have the X-Files and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And these are children's picture books. Like, sit down, children. I'm going to read you a story now. And the X-Files one, the little description is, the truth is out there, in the backyard. The classic television show is now a sweet, silly sci-fi bedtime story. Best friends Dana and Fox have pitched a tent in the backyard for an overnight sleepover. But the night is full of strange sounds, lights, and shadows. Surely there's a rational scientific explanation for everything. Or is there? And I'm reading this to him, and all of a sudden it hit me. I started like fighting in my mind. I'm like, but Dana and Fox didn't know each other as kids. Like I could not turn off that part of my brain. And like the Buffy one, they're 8. And I'm like, but Buffy didn't move to Sunnydale until she was in high school. I'm like, Tierney, stop it. It doesn't matter. Just enjoy the sweet story with your kid. And I was talking to you, and I was like, you know what's weird? When adult franchises market to children like this. Because they're not marketed, like this book was marketed to me. They knew I was a sucker and would buy this book.
You're right. They're not marketing to your kid. Your kid does not care. The kid would not be interested in Fox and, suddenly or Buffy or whatever. But it's like, okay, parents are going to read bedtime stories or read books to their kids. So, hey, let's put something out there that mom will want to read. Or mom will have affection for the character, and then the kids don't care because it's not like they have like a really high bar. When my first son was coming along, my cousin got me 2 CDs of lullabies, and they were lullaby versions of Coldplay and the Beatles.
Yes, I've seen stuff like that before.
And my cousin said, "It's like, I figure you didn't really want to hear Rockin' My Baby 20,000 times. Here's something," and it made sense. It's like, okay, I could put this on. Heck, I burned it onto my iPod, and I would play it when I was working just to have some soothing music on the background. So it makes sense. It's like, okay, gear towards the parent, and because the kids, as long as it's music that sounds pretty, they'll be happy. That's bad enough, and it's silly. It's like, okay, X-Files is about all this paranoia, and Fox is literally trying to find his kidnapped and presumably killed sister and hunts down monsters and serial killers and all. I know my mom was a huge X-Files fan. Her favorite episode was Home. Do you remember?
Oh! Yes, I do remember Home, as that noise can testify.
Ridiculously inbred and deformed hillbillies in the middle of Pennsylvania.
That feels like it could be its own episode, analyzing that was your mom's favorite.
That show being geared towards a version of that program being geared to kids is ridiculous. But what I remember, what I thought of when you first suggested this, is when I was middle school age, coming home and they would have weekday afternoon cartoons. So these would be the action cartoons. When people think of that, they think of Transformers, G.I. Joe, Thundercats. But they also would take a lot of known IPs and movie franchises and make cartoon versions of that. 2 of the ones that come first to mind is Rambo and RoboCop.
I really want to see the cartoon of him saying I was only there to take pictures.
RoboCop, the first movie was a brilliant, brutally violent action movie satire and pop culture satire. But it was ridiculously violent. I mean, RoboCop he would just walk around and he would just shoot people. He'd shoot the bad guys, and if he couldn't shoot him in the head, he would shoot him in the groin.
As you do.
And it's like, okay, we're going to take that and make it a kid's cartoon. It's like, how does that even work? He's a guy whose power is you shoot him and the bullets bounce off him, and then he just shoots you. And how do you boulderize that so it works for kids? And it didn't work for kids. It was terrible. Same with Rambo.
I was going to say, because at first my instinct was like, well, if you can watch G.I. Joe, surely there's a way to sanitize that. And I'm like, but the whole point of Rambo feels like it would be lost if you did that.
Yeah, especially with Rambo. And again, this isn't like an Adult Swim cartoon or something on Netflix. It's not Rick and Morty.
It's not something that is for adults in cartoon form. This is a cartoon for children.
For children. And Rambo, I had a conversation not too long ago with a friend about first Rambo movie was actually really good. Each subsequent movie became more of a ridiculous action film. But the first one, it starred Brian Dennehy, who just passed away, was the bad guy. It was actually a pretty neat commentary on the treatment of Vietnam veterans and about post-traumatic stress syndrome, how these people are pushed out to the fringes of society. And these are dangerous people who sacrifice basically their soul for their country in Vietnam War. And this is a point where we will realize just how crappy a war that was. And then they come back and they're treated so poorly. And hey, these are dangerous people. And if you push them too far, they're going to push back. But it was a really dark, sad movie. Now, the subsequent ones just became Sylvester Stallone becoming a really buff killing machine and them sending him after bad guys and him killing armies worth of bad guys single-handedly. So they became really a caricature of that first movie.
Which you can do. Parents will disapprove of the violence in cartoons, but there's a way to do that. It has been done. But the first Rambo is really much more psychologically interesting.
It is a good movie. The first Rambo is a good movie. Everything after that, and there was just a Rambo movie out last year that was absolute trash because this is weird that this is turning into a Rambo discussion. The last movie, it was basically an old man's wish fulfillment. A young woman is kidnapped. He's going to kill everybody. The girl that he's trying to save doesn't even survive the movie. And he just goes on revenge killing a lot of people of color. It's garbage.
Great.
The movie ends with the old white guy basically deciding that he needs to continue killing people. Like, there was also no lesson or anything sacrificed at the end of it. Just the idea of them, I think this was probably after Rambo 2 when the cartoon came out. You can't do the violence. It's not like he was going to go around shooting other cartoons, blowing their brains out or anything. So it was just so weird. And then there were Rambo toys.
I've run into the awkwardness of I have a bunch of board books that are based on like classic stories and everything. On the one hand, some of them fall into what you were saying. The kid doesn't know, the kid doesn't care. The Sherlock Holmes one is sound. The dog howls, the hound sniffs, the stairs creak, whatever it is. And my kid doesn't care. But we have the Monsters book of the Odyssey, which he loves. And now all of a sudden I have to explain to my 2-year-old in 2020 what a soothsayer is and why it's funny that the Cyclops is reading The Joy of Cooking and the sirens are saying, come to us. And I'm just like, this story is not, like, what am I supposed to make up for you? Just look at the monsters. What are you trying to do to me?
That's always hilarious when there's like stuff that's geared towards kid with mythology or fairy tales and how dark the source material is. I remember reading, it was an article on crack.com talking about the Harry Potter movies and the centaurs. How was it? Dolores Umbridge she thought she was going to talk down to a centaur and they just picked her up and carried her into the forest. And then after she came back, she was basically almost like borderline comatose after she came back. Crack.com explained, it's like, yeah, she was gang raped by those centaurs. It's like, what? And it turns out that a lot of the original mythology about centaurs, they would kidnap women and take them in the forest and rape them to death. Oh, well, this is all much darker than I had any idea. And now watching these movies is like, oh, well, you were the most evil, dislikable character in all these movies. But you didn't earn that.
Yeah. It's a little hard to qualify something like that. Yeah, I always ran into the awkwardness because I was a summer camp counselor while the Harry Potters were coming out. And so I remember that would always be a big deal. You know, parents would have the books sent to their kids when they came out because it was usually during the summer. You were forced to kind of stagger yourself because they only came out every so often. And now I know 8-year-olds who have read the entire series. And I'm just like, hi, 8-year-old, book 7 is not for you.
No, God.
It's so frustrating. And like, I have a friend who is a 5-year-old and she's reading him Harry Potter. And she's like, well, I don't say the bad parts. And I'm like, then what do you do after the like what? Just make up a story about a boy who has a pet owl if that's all you're going for. Like, there's just so much censoring that has to go into it that I'm like, okay, I think I'm gonna wait until I introduce my kids to this IP property. And I'm running into that now. It is killing me. I want to watch Star Wars so badly. And my kid has a stuffed animal. He has a poster of Chewie and the Porgs up on his wall. He knows who Chewie is. Points at porgs. He says birds. Fine. Good enough. And he knows all that. He likes his robot book, which it has R2-D2 and C-3PO on it. Like, we are a Star Wars household. And he has napped on me while I watched The Last Jedi one time. But he is too young for Star Wars. I really want to watch Star Wars. I really I need him to be just that little bit older so that he's okay enough. So I'm counting down those days.
Yeah, because how old's your kiddo?
He's 2.
Yeah, he's just at the point where, well, yeah, he's old enough where he's going to pick up stuff that you don't want him to pick up. I think up until they're 1, they don't even know what's going on.
Oh, he's seen the entire Godfather trilogy, but he was only 2 months old at the time, so that does not count.
I remember when my oldest was like a week old. He woke up at midnight. I was like, I got up to feed him. I went downstairs. I was pretty sleep deprived. I got warmed up his bottle. I'm feeding him, and I'm like, I got to put something on TV. And I'm just flipping through. I was like, what's that? Spartacus, Blood and Sand. Didn't I hear something about that? And I'm watching it. The people who haven't watched Spartacus, Blood and Sand, it's basically all the sex and all the violence of Game of Thrones, but with none of the really good acting. It's very cheesy. It's just a completely brutal, and the sex is golly.
Even half asleep, you knew that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, whoa, that's someone's vagina. There's a penis. I was not expecting that. And then I'm like watching this, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my 10-day-old is still in my hands. Like, he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. Now I say that, I have had to fish out. We have a Little Tykes, the pizza delivery guy. He has a little car, a little pizza box, and he delivers pizza. He goes around. Or Little People, I think, instead of Little Tykes. Whatever it is. One of those interchangeable plastic pieces, because my uncle ran a pizza restaurant for years. So my aunt saw that in the store and was like, oh my God, Patrick has to have that. So she got us that. And then, unrelated, he has a toy that's called the color mixer. So it looks like a cement mixer, but you drop in different colored balls and it like talks and says, now do blue. And then it plays a song if you do blue. And anyway, he put the pizza delivery man in the cement mixer. And there was a little part of me that was like, is this because I watched the Godfather movies when he was a child? Like, did part of him, I know that Italian-American Anti-Defamation League is very active. And I did worry a little bit that perhaps they had been onto something, that was my kid's instinct.
No, kids are just dark. I walked into the kitchen and there was my daughter. She had a mixing bowl filled halfway with water and 5 Barbies with their heads dunked in. And I looked at her, and I looked at the Barbies, I looked at her, I looked at the Barbies, and I just backed out of the room. It's like, I don't know what information she's trying to get out of the Barbies. I hope for their sake they give it up soon, because that is dark.
She seems to have the situation under control. I don't need to become involved in this.
There was another time where she had some stuffed animal or some toy, and I think, again, she was dunking it into water, and she just kept singing songs like, good night, good night.
Yes.
I was like, oh, man, I've seen this movie, and Dad does not make it to the end, so I am out of luck.
I was a little bit worried that my kid was going to end up being super violent because, of course, the rules about screen time are gone. I don't know if this has happened in your household yet, but like as a parent of younger kids, you have it drilled into you, like you must limit screen time. You can't let them see anything violent. You can't let them watch more than 20 minutes a day of TV or computer or all that stuff. And that is gone, Brad. Hours of Curious George now. But he discovered the show Dino Trucks, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you are listening to this and you don't know what I'm describing, is it a dinosaur that is a truck? Yes. Is it a dinosaur that turns into a truck? No. Is it a truck that turns into a dinosaur? No. They are dinosaur trucks. Of course, my son thought they were the greatest thing ever. We put them on when he was at his grandparents' house. They were like, oh, a kid's show. Here you go. And then they got to the later episodes and it started getting kind of violent because they're like fighting T-Rexes and velociraptors are chasing them. And then there were arachnid spider that had lasers coming out of their eyes. And I was like, this got a little violent for a 2-year. And he wasn't 2 at that point. And I was like, I don't know about this. Should I be worried? And contrasting that with what's advertised to 2-year-olds. And it's like, very gentle music, soft pastel colors. And my kid is over here like, dozer, flip. You know what? I went with it and he was fine. Now we have superheroes. And this was another thing that I had jotted down to talk to you about. The weirdness of something that is geared towards children, that is appropriate for children. Like maybe my 2-year-old shouldn't be watching this, but a 5-year-old, yeah, definitely. Like it's a kid's show. He's discovered Teen Titans Go, and he adores Teen Titans Go, and it is great. He watches superheroes. We watch superheroes. We love this, but it is weird because I was introduced to those characters via the television show Titans, and let me tell you, that is a different vibe than Teen Titans Go. Even than Teen Titans, the cartoon, which is how this whole started because we finally got access to wherever the movie was streaming that they made recently, or I'm using recently in air quotes. We hadn't seen it though. So we watched the Teen Titans movie and it was like, well, it's a cartoon. He can be in the room while we watch this. Again, it's a little violent for his age, but it's fine. We're not worried about him seeing it. And he loved it. So you're like, oh no, we got to find you something then. Now he's obsessed with Teen Titans Go. And can I tell you how weird it is to watch like these characters and be thinking of them as dark, angsty, incredibly violent and sexual beings. But they look like Powerpuff Girls.
My kids, I think they've gotten away from it. They definitely went through a Teen Titans Go phase. Aside from, it can be a bit much to watch because it's so bouncy and kinetic. And it's like, it can be a little tiring to watch. And the humor can be kind of adult.
There was one that was all about them having crushes. Raven lost her cloak, and so Beast was all obsessed with her legs.
Oh, yeah, like it's this.
I mean, it was funny, but it was also a little bit like, hey, this isn't cool, but also you're way too young to explain why this isn't cool.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you had blocked that out and just been glad that you had gotten past that point.
But what's funny is the show can also be so smart, and it does do the thing that good cartoons can do. I'm a big fan of, my kids loved Phineas and Ferb, and I think Phineas and Ferb is a brilliant show. It doesn't touch upon the adult issues nearly as often, but there is stuff that happens in it where I laugh, and my kids look at me, he's like, why'd you laugh at that? It's like, it's a Star Wars reference from a movie, it's from a reference from a movie 40 plus years ago. Trust me, it's a hilarious joke. Sometimes some of these cartoons make you think twice. It's like, I don't know if they're kids. It's making me explain things. But I remember my cousin, he had his first kid a year after my oldest was born. And he said, it's like, I decided I was only going to let my kid watch like the sort of cartoons I watched. And I got a DVD of old Bugs Bunny cartoons. He's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
It was so violent. Daffy Duck gets shot in the face so many times. It could also be really racist.
And women? What women? They're just objects.
The Vargas girl builds the big chest and impossibly narrow, basically the Jessica Rabbit build. There was one cartoon that I saw on a VHS when I worked at a video store, it's like, oh, Bugs Bunny, we'll pop this in. And we put it on the TV in the store. They had Bugs was being chased by an African-American chasing him. And it was the blackface design.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the way he looked, but also the way he talked. I was like, what the hell? I was like, oh, I understand how come this has never made it to like the Cartoon Network in the afternoon.
Can I tell you, one of my grandmother's most beloved possessions was that her daughter got her in Mexico a bootleg VHS of Song of the South.
I knew you were going to say Song of the South. Oh my God.
And it was like in a box for something else. It was like in the box for the Three Caballeros, but then when you open it up, the tape was Song of the South. And she was like, I get why they don't put this on, but like I had the, cause I had the sing-along tape with like Zippity Doodah and stuff. So it was very weird growing up in the 80s because this was clearly something that everyone knew existed. And there were references to it, and there's Splash Mountain still happening. But you could never, like, it was very weird. And so she loved the fact that my aunt was on vacation and, like, in a market, and someone had a bunch of bootleg VHSs, and she was like, oh, I'm getting this.
You're right. The references have gone away as time has marched on. But when I remember growing up, in Fletch 2, they basically had a dream sequence where Chevy Chase as Fletch reenacted the Zippity Doodah scene.
Brad, our kids will have no idea. Like, that just won't be a thing that their brain computes.
They won't have the reference to get the joke. To anyone who isn't familiar, and it was, God, when did Songs of the South come out?
Is that 50s?
1946.
Whoa, I was off.
And it was basically the old Brer Rabbit stories, but animated. But then they had a Uncle Remus. It's played by James Baskett. I think he was nominated for an Oscar for this. This was actually considered to be forward-thinking when it came out.
Yep.
They actually let an African-American man play an African-American character in a movie that was really innovative in a mainstream movie. But he was he a freed slave or...
Oh, I don't remember. He was just the kindly older African-American man singing to a couple white kids. That's fine, right? That's not weird, is it?
Yeah, it is. For anyone that needs to be understood, that is a joke. We do not think it's a good thing. Please.
I first started this talking about a children's book for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's within our lifetime. Do you remember how cutting-edge progressive Buffy the Vampire Slayer felt like? And now it is considered so, not fully regressive, but like really cringeworthy moments in whole episodes where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that storyline. And it's like, that was as good as it got, guys.
People don't understand the Willow character, where partway through, what was it, the fourth season, where the character Willow came out of the closet.
That's what I was just thinking of. There is still argument. People are still fighting in this time about whether Willow is a lesbian or bisexual. Because in the later part of the series, she identifies as, I think there's some joke where someone's like, oh, starting to get jealous of her. And she's like, hello, I'm gay. Like, you don't need to worry about me with your man. And people are like, but you had a whole relation, like...
She had a 2-year relationship with a guy.
Yeah, she didn't, just hold hands with a guy and that was it. Like, that was a whole relationship. Like, a foundational part of her growing up was a relationship with a man. And so people were like, oh, so was she bisexual? And I it's so funny talking to people who are even just a little bit younger than us. And some of your listeners are probably like, what the heck is going on? It never even occurred to anyone to address the fact that people could be bisexual. That was so far down the road that the fact that she came out was the amazing thing.
Also, the fact that when she was identifying as straight, she made out with her boyfriend, made out with another guy behind her boyfriend's back. She was physical with these people. And then as soon as she's in a gay relationship, she was in this lesbian relationship for 2 years before they had the courage to show her kissing her girlfriend, because that's how different TV was.
It was all very implied.
Yeah, all very implied. Is like, oh, well, I think they're dating. Is like, and the height of their relationship is they hugged once in an episode. Now, contrast that with, heck, there was an episode of Law & Order Special Victims Unit where one of the female cops is undercover, and to keep her cover, she's making out with another woman in one scene. It wasn't a plot point, and it wasn't a character point for her. It was actually really cheap. It wasn't a thing where afterwards, it's discovered that's actually part of her sexuality, or that's part of her personality, or that she is gay and how she dealt with that, or it's stirring up confusion or feelings. It's like, no, it was basically played as a joke, or a thing. It was like people who might like that character because she's very pretty. Oh, they get to tune in and watch her kiss another woman. It was just, yeah, that happened. So it just shows how different it is. And you're right. It's hard to give somebody who might be 10 years younger watching old episodes of Buffy explaining how big a deal this was.
And it really does give me hope for this future generation, because the people who are even just that little bit younger than us think we're crazy. The next generation is so much further down that line that I'm really curious to see, like, when our kids grow up, when they're adults, is this all just going to be totally normal?
I remember when I was in school reading and having class discussions about To Kill a Mockingbird, and just students standing up is like, how could they convict the African-American guy? He so obviously didn't do it. He just couldn't have, he couldn't have done it. He couldn't have done it. As if that was the point, that whether or not he did it. It's like, no, he was black. And if you were black and on trial, you were going to be convicted, especially when the accuser is a white woman. So many of these kids, and I went to a predominantly white high school, even these suburban white kids could not wrap their head around the disconnect. Like, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of racism in the world, and there was plenty of racism in that high school, but no matter how far gone you may be, that didn't make sense. This is the next level of it. Trying to explain to a generation later is like, what do you mean they wouldn't show two girls or two guys kissing on the TV? We see that stuff all the time. That's like happens in the first 10 minutes of an episode of How to Get Away with Murder.
Those were very special episodes. It does my heart good anytime I do feel like the old fogey, because I'm like, that's a good sign though. I should. Like, that's great. That means things are moving along, which is the way they should happen. It's always going to be a little bit of a disconnect, because it's hard, because you end up trying to defend these things, or I'm like, oh, I guess that was a bad storyline, but it didn't seem like it at the time. Or problematic faves are a thing, because there's always that little part of you that loves them.
Well, one thing I want to talk about, because you brought up adult IPs that are tweaked to be marketed to kids.
We've strayed, yes. Please bring us back.
That's how the world goes. Well, I actually want to go in the opposite direction, because just as we're recording, they released the first episode on Sci-Fi of the DC Universe series Harley Quinn, which is completely the opposite, because that is an IP, and the Harley Quinn character was originally made for the weekday afternoon Batman series. They are taking a cartoon and they're taking all the classic Batman characters, Batman, Robin, Commissioner Gordon, Bane, Joker, and Harley Quinn. And it's an animated series that very much has the look and feel of that classic Batman animated series.
But it's so bad. It's so good.
There's so much sex. There's so much swearing. The violence is profoundly disturbing at times.
It's so good, though. I love that show.
The first episode has Harley Quinn and then the Joker melting people and murdering dozens of, and they're sort of bad guys that they're killing, but that's the show. And you see it with other products. I remember oh gosh, the show's probably 20 years old. There was an HBO animated series based on Spawn, the comic book. Now, the comic book wasn't necessarily a kid's comic book. There still wasn't like profanity, and the sexuality of characters was, the typical sexuality that you would see in comic books, where women who didn't have normal human proportions, so exceedingly big chests and exceedingly big rear ends with small waists, but no nudity or anything. But then they did this hard R-rated cartoon on HBO where it's like, okay, maybe the comic book was PG-13, but it was an R-rated cartoon with a lot of profanity, really visceral violence, and a lot of sex. And it made you wonder, it's like, why is this happening? And then they made an R-rated feature film as well.
I haven't noticed anything that extreme, but it does kind of make me think of, I recently watched Bumblebee, the movie, and it kind of reminded me of that swinging pendulum that Transformers has been on, where it started out as toys and a cartoon to sell toys. And then they made and then they made the live action, I'm thinking of the Michael Bay movies, and they started out for middle schoolers, and then they started to swing a little bit too much, and no one was just, so now they're back in Bumblebee, and they're swinging back again towards the younger kids. And it was very weird to live through because I loved the first Michael Bay. They're not good movies, but I loved them. Again, you can recognize the problems, but you're still like, but man, things exploded, and then like Dashboard Confessional played, and that's just where I was at that time in my life.
The first Michael Bay Transformers movie, yeah, it had a lot of problems. The plot made no sense. The action scenes were stupid. And the designs of the characters, both the voice work and the looks of a lot of the characters, is like, I did not know which Transformer was which because the designs were so bad. But Optimus Prime looked and sounded like Optimus Prime. And it was so cool to see these characters that I loved and I was a huge Transformers fan when I was little. It was so cool to see them interacting and moving, and the voices were right, and it was cool. There were the things that it did right, and the anticipation of, oh my God, I can't believe I'm seeing this movie, overcame those problems.
And it's so frustrating. I was so excited to see the second movie because I'm like, this is awesome. They're making more. It's going to be so great. And then what happened, Brad?
Michael Bay became too successful, and they had a tough time saying no to him.
It was bad.
He turned into his worst instincts. The way the camera would just leer after the female characters. And that kept getting worse because I remember by the time the third one came along, first off, Shia LaBeouf was also a victim of his own success, where the more
everyone was phoning it in by then.
He just became so Shia LaBeouf-y. And they replaced Megan Fox with a very pretty woman who couldn't act at all. And it's a shame. It's like, it's unbelievable that I'm saying is like that show really missed from the acting prowess of Megan Fox.
I loved her character in the first one. There was some leering, but she was a cool character. She had the dog. I loved that, man. And then in the second one, it got weird so fast. So bad.
Megan Fox, whatever you want to say about her, she's not a great actress, but she definitely has screen presence and an interesting, different look. The woman they replaced her with was most famous for being a briefcase girl on Deal or No Deal and a juggy dancer on The Man Show. And the people who aren't familiar with The Man Show, going back to Adam Carolla, was a show hosted by Adam Carolla and Jimmy Kimmel. It was like a sketch show, and the whole idea is like, this is a show by men and for men. And some of it, at its best, was sort of parody of that. But they also would have like dancers who were buxom.
With the beers and the whole, yeah.
Yeah. And they had a recurring bit where at the end of every episode is like, all right, now we're going to end the episode with girls on trampolines. And they would just have these attractive women jumping on trampolines in slow motion.
Mm-hmm.
The woman who was in the third movie who replaced Megan Fox, that's where she came from. That gives you an idea of what she looked like. She had these bee-stung lips, big chest, big rear end, and the camera would follow her butt as it went up the stairs with no acting ability on top of that.
She could have been the nicest person in the world. No, it was still very, very bad. She was not set up to succeed, is the most possible generous way to put that.
There's nothing wrong with being really beautiful and being a model, and that's fantastic, but that doesn't make you the lead in a $1 billion movie.
There have been Bond girls who were that way, who were fabulous, but she was not that. And that's that weird thing. Like, the Transformers went from, like, isn't it cool to see this on the big screen, to actually kind of trying to be James Bond with robots. And then they realized they were not doing that well, and the film started to fail a bit more. And so Bumblebee was supposed to be this, like, return to the kinder, gentler battling robots.
Bumblebee I enjoyed that movie a lot, but it had so much going against it because there was so much goodwill wasted on the previous movies. It didn't do very well financially. And I think that was because, first off, it wasn't like anybody had a vested interest in the Bumblebee character. Nobody was clamoring for a Bumblebee movie.
A Bumblebee origin story.
People didn't come out for the movie. I think it's done pretty well subsequently. Like, people have sort of found it on Blu-ray and on demand and whatever.
It got good word of mouth, at least in my universe, because I had heard, like, no, it's actually pretty good. And then both the lead actress and the mom, what is her name from the TV show Better Things? I adore her.
Yeah, she's Bobby from King of the Hill. Pam Albion?
Yes. So and the mute, like, it had a lot going for it in my heart.
Pam Adlon. And she's wonderful. She is wonderful.
She's wonderful. It gets back to that, like, let's just make a sweet movie for, like, older kids but still kids, instead of trying to have it be this, like, sexy teenager thing, because that obviously wasn't working.
It worked for a while. I mean, it was one of those things where the movies were bad and they made a ton of money.
That's true. I guess my definition of working isn't the same as executive producers of the Transformers movies.
Well, the problem is with movies like that, first off, they're so expensive to make. And then when the bottom falls out, it falls out hard and it takes a long time to fix it. It'll make a ton of money until it doesn't. And that's what happened. Like, the last Michael Bay movie did not make a lot of money. And it needed to make so much to make back the budget. And then people were so turned off by the movies at that point, when they actually made a good Transformers movie, nobody cared.
Yeah, the bottom falls out and they ruined Transformers for a whole generation.
I'm even looking as like, what is the future? Like, there's nothing set up.
There's, like, no buzz anymore.
Actually, here's interesting. On May 2020, it was reported that Paramount scheduled a release date of June 24th, 2022 for the next live-action Transformers movie.
Okay.
We'll see. That sounds like the sort of thing that doesn't happen.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm so excited to see Indy 5, Brad. Kids dressed up as Indiana Jones, and actually what I'm thinking of is my favorite is I want to say 8-year-old, somewhere around there. Like, still very much a kid, but old enough that he could have said no. Dressed up for Halloween, like, as Brody from Jaws. And it's so well done, and I love it. But I'm also like, how did this happen?
What do you know about Jaws, kid?
How do you know about that? If he was younger, like, oh my God, I think one of the cutest things I ever saw was a probably 1.5-year-old. I just saw it on the internet. I don't know this kid. Dressed up as Cameron Fry from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And he was adorable, and I loved him. But that kid didn't say no. That's something the parents did. Like, that was for the parents' enjoyment. And I'm glad they did and took a picture and put it on the internet. But this was a kid that was old enough to say, like, I want to be a Ghostbuster for Halloween, or whatever kids say these days. I don't know. But it always, like, there's that weird in between where I'm like, did you see this? In which case I have questions. Or did your parents make you do this? In which case I feel bad enjoying how well they did. It's so funny. I remember before I had kids seeing the Sesame Street parodies. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a parody of Sons of Anarchy. And they were doing poetry readings. My mother-in-law loved it. And I was like, who is this for? And the same thing, they had Game of Thrones, and it was Cersei and Tyrion, and it was all about learning to respect your siblings' feelings and not hurt their feelings. And I was just like, toddlers don't know about Game of Thrones, right, guys? Like, there was that little part of me that was kind of worried, like, who is this for? And someone had to be like, Tierney, this isn't for the kids. The kids don't know who these people are. They don't care. They're moving on by the time of the next segment because Elmo's there. But it's for the parents who have to watch these things to enjoy.
I remember a Sesame Street thing where it was a take on True Blood. I was like, True Blood?
It feels weird, right? This is why I came to you and was like, Brad, I have a lot of complicated feelings that I need to work out on your podcast.
Sesame Street is great at doing that because they know who the audience is. It's the kids. The kids are just there for the Muppets, and they'll laugh like crazy when Elmo does something silly. What they're taking off from is very adult, but their take on it isn't adult. The True Blood did not have the sex and violence and the blood drinking of the show. It was just, it's true blood, whatever the joke was, and it was very cute. But the parents can all laugh. It's like, the kids have no idea what happened in the movie, or in the TV show, rather. It's really fun stuff. And what is your son's favorite shows now?
I would say the Curious George cartoon's pretty top of the charts right now. He loves that. And then the other one that he is absolutely obsessed with, Dinosaur Train, TBS show. I'm learning a lot from that because they use the real names of dinosaurs and stuff. Then two that are related that I think are dubbed. I know the bus one is Tayo the Little Bus, which is South Korea city buses that drive around. I think it's funny that Tayo is number 120, which is our local bus route. I don't know that he cottoned onto that, but I enjoy it. And it's just young buses learning how to make friends and doing their job, driving around. They make friends with the construction vehicles, and there's a helicopter called Air, and he loves it. That's probably his favorite. But there's also a cartoon called Chuggington about trains.
Oh, watch so many Chuggingtons.
Oh my God. Now, did you start? Oh, so this is great. So if I did something wrong, you could go, bumpers. And I would know exactly what you're talking about. That was my favorite thing that I could, anytime something goes wrong, bumpers.
Here's the thing with Curious George. My kids still like Curious George. And the animation is gorgeous. And the music on Curious George is fantastic. The problem I have with that is the way the people interact with that monkey is senseless.
Is he a child or an adult?
The episode that made me crazy, and I yell about it every time it's on. There was one episode where there was a young woman who, in a department store, ran a candy stand.
Yes! Why was he left in charge? He's a monkey!
She had to do something. And she had interacted with the monkey before. And she's like, I gotta go. And the monkey's like, and Curious George is like raising his hand that he'll take care of it. And she's like, are you sure? He's like, uh-huh. And then she's like, okay. And then she wanders off. Curious George gives away too much of the candy. And she comes back and she's upset. It's like, I can't believe you gave away all the candy. He's like, it's a freaking monkey. And you didn't even vet the monkey. Listen, I was a human being and they checked my references when I were my first job. I was like, that's on you.
Sometimes he has jobs and responsibilities, and other times he's treated like a 4-year-old. And it's very inconsistent and confusing. And I'm kind of Team Hundley when it comes to everything.
Oh, Hundley's awesome. The people who aren't subjected to this cartoon. And again, as far as cartoons go, the music's great. The animation's good, very good. And it has a lesson. And if you have a kid, it's fantastic. I'm not taking a shot at the cartoon per se. It's just my adult brain can't help but look at the flaws in logic. But Hundley's a little dachshund who seems to be the only creature on the show that realizes, like, you guys realize this is a monkey, right? And seems really upset by stuff that they let George do. And I have a soft spot for dachshunds anyway, so he's a really cute because he's a dachshund. And the dog's like, he's like, everybody get your head in the game. The monkey's running the store.
I just love that you're going to have to put in a beep because we talked about Curious George. Like, that's what pushed us over the edge.
There was an episode that my kids love where the man in the yellow hat sent George to the donut shop to get a dozen donuts. And because George learned how you can make numbers bigger by adding 0, he ordered 100 dozen donuts. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm pretty sure legally an order placed by a monkey, you're not financially responsible for. It's a goddamn monkey. When it makes orders that many donuts, you stop and you make a phone call. If I sent my 10-year-old into a donut shop and he said, I want 100 dozen donuts, they would say, like, we got to talk to your dad first.
Yeah.
I have honestly thought about doing a episode-by-episode podcast about Curious George to talk about this stuff.
If this lockdown lasts long enough, we know what to do. My favorite is, and I lucked out, we did not have easy access to it, so while my kid loves Thomas the Train, it has not taken over our lives. I have friends who it has taken over, but I've seen enough of it that what I love is my friends and I got together, and as our 1.5-year-olds played next to each other, because they don't actually play with each other, but they played next to each other. It was great. We discussed the awkward capitalistic overtones of Thomas the Train and got into like a heated dispute about labor issue because it doesn't take long for you to get that vibe off it. And we're like, what is the show teaching them?
Well, Thomas the Train also, it ties in, and we got to finish up because
we have to go do things.
We have to go do things. But it actually goes back to the R-rated things being R-rated IPs going into the world of kids programming, because George frickin' Carlin was the conductor.
Oh, yeah.
George, 7 Things You Can't Say on Television, Carlin was the conductor. And what's crazy is it wasn't a thing of Eddie Murphy, where Eddie Murphy started as a R-rated comedian who would do very adult movies. And as he got older and as he had kids, he softened up and he started doing not even necessarily kids movie, although he did do a share of kids movies, but he started doing PG and PG-13 movies, and he started voicing. Like, as you get older, it's a natural thing to lose your edge. George Carlin, during the day, would be the conductor. And then at night, he would do his comedy tours, and he put out his comedy album that got darker as he got older.
Can only go one of two ways.
And I remember there was a Carlin album where he went into like some really things like, hey, I watch, and I'm probably mixing up his bits, but he would do a bit like, hey, I watched NASCAR because I want to see the cars flip and go into the crowd and see how many people they can wipe out. And it's okay because, it's the conductor speaking. I was like, holy crap.
It's the Bob Saget principle.
Right.
It should be the George Carlin principle, but I'm sorry. Full House, it's the Bob Saget principle. He introduced America's Funniest Home Videos, and then he was dirty. Danny was dirty.
People aren't familiar. Bob Saget, of course, probably best known from being on Full House and the original host of America's Funniest Home Videos, who had a squeaky clean image from those two things, because his jokes on America's Funniest, they were very clean and terrible.
Yeah.
And I actually knew somebody who, there's a local college that actually had Bob Saget come and do a comedy show. His comedy is filthy and also terrible.
Yep.
He's not a good comedian. It actually bothered me with him. The little bit of Bob Saget comedy I'd seen, he was doing the thing of swearing and then complaining about how lame the stuff he did was. And it bothered me because you can't have it both ways. You can't be the host of America's Funniest Home Videos, making a living and making so much money doing that, and then go on the comedy tour and complain about how lame it is to show. It's like, if it bothers you that much as lame, stop being lame on it or don't do it.
Yeah, that's the point of the show.
It was a weird biting the hand that feeds you and doing this lame show, but also being smug about it and how crappy it is. It's like, you can't complain about how crappy it is. You're part of what's crappy. It'd be like if Ryan Seacrest complained about how stupid it was that they're still doing American Idols. Like, you're part of the problem.
You're cashing those royalty checks.
Tierney, it's been wonderful. I'm glad we did this. This is great.
Obviously, we can talk as long as we need to.
Oh, geez.
Have fun editing it.
Plug your pluggables.
Pluggables. The easiest thing to plug is my website, One Steel Sister, ONESTEELESISTER.com, because that has links to the podcast shows I do, the guest appearances I do, and my writing, which I swear to God is getting close to actually having books for sale instead of links to an old blog, some articles I've written, and a big coming soon that has been coming soon for quite a while. I am inching closer and closer to publication. Someday that will be there. But in the meantime, there's tons of podcasting stuff there. So I'm this summer going to do a show about League of Their Own, which is my latest, greatest. And I'm going to be wrapping up Joe versus the Volcano. Well, Joe versus the Minute about Joe versus the Volcano. So I've been in a very Tom Hanksian place, which I think is why I'm in this like, okay, I am an adult and I know I'm an adult and I'm not pretending not to be, but I'm surrounded by a lot of kids things and I'm getting a weird disconnect from it. That feels very like he's done some kid things. They're usually not that hard to like separate out, but then it all starts to pile up on each other.
I had a great time on Joe versus the Minute the 2 times I was on. That was a great show. Jarf is one of my oldest and dearest friends. You guys have fantastic chemistry and have done a great show. So recommend everyone check it out. And Tierney, we're going to do this again soon.
Whew. Well, we can do this. We can survive this, even with the kids.
That wraps episode 203. So much fun talking to Tierney Steele. She is always a delight and has an open invitation to return any time she would like. Now, for a public service announcement. Tuesday, November 3rd, we'll be here before you know it. I'm hoping everyone who listens is already registered to vote. If not, please go to whereweallvote.org to do so. There is still time. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, because I'm just a guy who knows a lot about Spider-Man. But I will ask, very nicely, for you to make your voice heard. Again, that is whereweallvote.org. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, Tim Burdick returns to talk James Bond. Until then, in the immortal words of Jarf Hardin,
see you in the funny pages.
Power of love. That's the power of love.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
It felt like I was wearing a too tight bra and shirt.